is free. God is love. In Christ we have redemption found. God is love. His blood has washed our sins away. His Spirit turned our night to day. And now we can rejoice to say that God is love. God is love. God is love. Come, let us all unite to sing that God is love. How happy is our portion here. God is love. His promises our spirits cheer. God is love. He is our sun and shield by day, our help, our hope, our strength and stay. He will be with us all the way. Our God is love. God is love. God is love. Come, let us all unite to sing that God is love.
Good morning. It's such a blessing to be able to be out today to worship God, but as sort of usual, it seems like our weather pattern has come back, rain and cold, but it's still a blessing to be able to be out to open our Bibles and to study from God's Word. So good to have a couple of visitors this morning from Gilroy, Brenda and Taylor Waldron. Appreciate them so very much. Always good to look out and see faces that are familiar, and always at Gilroy they were there, and that's such a blessing, as so many of you are. It means more than you can imagine to preachers and teachers and elders and deacons and everyone. We're beginning a new study this morning from the book of Judges. Very first lesson. Couple of quarters ago, I guess you would say, the study was on the book of Joshua. And I know we began our books here last quarter on Mark, so we didn't get to study Joshua. And Joshua really leads into this book of Judges. So just quickly going to give you a very, very short review of what happened in the book of Joshua to sort of set the scene for what we're about to begin to study this quarter. Joshua, kind of easy to remember. Just break the book down into 3 parts. 24 chapters total, chapters 1 through 4. In the book of Joshua now we're talking about. Chapters 1 through 4, we remember that Joshua is taking Moses' place. The people are fully behind Joshua. Spies are sent out into the land of Canaan, the promised land, and preparation is made to enter into the promised land. That's chapters 1 through 4. Chapters 5 through 12 in the book of Joshua, we have the conquest of the land. The land is taken. The people are overthrown. And in chapters 13 through 24, the land is divided up among those tribes. You know, when I read, and even when I was studying the book of Joshua, it's like, well, you know, it's no big deal. I mean, for the most part, no big deal. When you read in the book of Joshua, kind of similar to what we're going to be studying in the book of Judges, as long as the people did what God said for them to do, they were blessed and they were victorious. But anytime they would deviate at all, or anytime they would, sort of become slack in following the commandments of God, they began to suffer. And we're going to see that in our study this morning or this quarter as well. As long as they were faithful, God blessed them. But one of the things, and what I want you to keep in mind for this study, is what I sort of forget And I think this is going to be a good study because it's going to remind us of this. God had promised them what land? What are we talking about here? God had promised them what? Land of Canaan, the promised land. He promised them that. I mean, he assured them of that, didn't he? What I forget sometimes is because God promises something, it's going to come to pass, but it does not. And if you don't remember everything I say, remember this. It does not necessarily mean it's going to be easy. You know, I often think, it's going to be a cakewalk. It's going to be, a walk in the park. It's going to be easy. It's going to be simple. It's not. It's going to be difficult. It's going to be trying and tempting. But with God's help, it's going to come to pass. Never forget that. I kind of equate what we're about to study and don't want to get too far off before we begin. But I think about Jesus and the disciples. And in particular, I think about the occasion where Jesus told his disciples to get into the boat and to go to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. And almost immediately after Jesus left them, he went up into a mountain to pray. And the storm came up and the boat's about to sink, and the disciples are scared and frightful. They're doing what Jesus told them to do, and they're going to make it to the other side. But it's not going to always be an easy journey. And it wasn't with them. It wasn't with the Israelites in Canaan. And it's not going to be an easy journey always in our life, is it? But if we stick to the promises that God's given to us, we are assured that we're going to be able to make it. And so this study really, to me, it picks up, as the writer says, where Joshua ends. But to me, it gives some insight into just how difficult it was because of their own, well, at times, they were their worst enemies. They just like the roller coaster. I mean, I can't think of a better way to describe it. At times, they were strong, faithful, dedicated, devoted, and nothing could stop them. And then, it seems like with the passing of time, they became, sort of lax in their faithfulness, and they began to slip downhill, and they began to leave God. The gods of the people whose land they were in, who they did not totally eliminate as God had instructed them to do so, began to influence them. And before you know it, here they are down here. They're sinning just like those people whose land they had overtaken and they had allowed to live. And then they began to ask God for help and faithfulness and, repented and were brought back up. That's sort of what this study is going to be about. It's going to remind us of some things that I believe are relevant in our day and time. Now, with that in mind, before we go any further, let's go to God in prayer, please. Dear God, our Father in heaven, we thank you so much for all the many wonderful blessings that you give us each day. We're so thankful for this opportunity to open our Bibles and to study from your Word. We're thankful for the direction that it gives, for the strength that we receive by studying these wonderful examples of those who have lived before us, of their trials and sometimes tribulations, and of their faithfulness and sometimes of their lack thereof. Help us, Father, in this study that will be blessed. Father, we're mindful of several that are not well, several that are struggling with illnesses, with cancer. And we ask your blessings upon each one of these. We continue our prayers for Brother Charles and the treatments that he's making, that everything will do good. We're thankful, Father, for Cindy, for the improvement that she's made, and for the medications that she's taking, that they'll continue to do well. We pray, Father, that you'll help us each day to put our trust in you, knowing that you know what's best for each of us. We ask that you bless us in this study. Help us to have open hearts. Help us to have open minds. This is our prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. If you do have your books, or if you have your Bibles, Judges chapter 1. Judges chapter 1. I'll begin reading here with verse 1. We'll read through verse 15. Now after the death of Joshua, it came to pass that the children of Israel asked the Lord, saying, Who shall be first to go up against the Canaanites to fight against them? And the Lord said, Judah shall go up. Indeed, I've delivered the land into his hand. So Judah said to Simeon, his brother, Come up with me to my allotted territory, that we might fight against the Canaanites. And I will likewise go with you to your allotted territory. And Simeon went with him. Then Judah went up, and the Lord delivered the Canaanites to Perizzites into their land, and they killed 10,000 men at Bezek. Now, and this is one of the things that I'm sort of alluded to a moment ago when I was talking about the struggles that they have. 10,000 men here that they killed at Bezek. I mean, this was going to be a battle, wasn't it? It's going to take effort. I sometimes think, and wrongfully so, that when God says something, yes, it's going to come to pass, as I've already mentioned, but it's just going to be very, very easy. That's not the case. It wasn't with the taking of the promised land of Canaan, and it's not going to be in our life. God hasn't ever promised us that the skies are always going to be blue and the sun's always going to be shining. That's what I want. You know, I said this a number of times, and Brendan Taylor probably will remember it at Gilroy. Well, what Jerry wants heaven on earth. Jerry wants a place of, no pain, no struggles, no heartaches, no sorrow, no tears. All of those things that I read about over there in the book of Revelation 21 that's promised eternally in heaven, but they're never promised here on earth. There's going to be struggles. So 10,000 men here at Bezek. Verse 5. And they found Adoni-Bezek in Bezek and fought against him, and they defeated the Canaanites and the Perizzites. Then Adoni-Bezek fled, and they pursued him and caught him, and look at what they did. They cut off his thumbs and his big toes. Then Adoni-Bezek said 70 kings with their thumbs and big toes cut off used to gather scraps under my table, as I have done, so God has repaid me. Then they brought him to Jerusalem, and there he died. Now the children of Judah fought against Jerusalem and took it. They struck it with the edge of the sword and set the city on fire. And afterward the children of Judah went down to fight against the Canaanites who dwelt in the mountains in the south and in the lowland. Then Judah went against the Canaanites who dwelt in Hebron. Now the name of Hebron was formerly Kirjath Arba, and they killed Sheshai, Ahiman, and Talmai. From there they went against the inhabitants of Debir. The name of Debir was formerly Kirjath Sepher. Then Caleb said, Whoever attacks Kirjath Sepher and takes it, to him I will give my daughter Axa as wife. And Othniel, the son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother, took it. So he gave him his daughter Aksa as wife. Now it happened when she came to him that she urged him to ask her father for a field. And she dismounted from her donkey, and Caleb said to her, "What do you wish?" So she said to him, "Give me a blessing since you've given me land in the south. Give me also waters, give me also springs of water." And Caleb gave her the upper springs and the lower springs. So what a strong, mindseted lady here to want that which was needed. All right, the introduction here. One of the things that I've mentioned several times already, this is what I want you to keep in mind. The struggle was real. The dedication that it took can't be minimized. Their faithfulness had to be unequaled. Their faith in God, their belief in God, and their dedication to doing what God said for them to do. Emphasize that because the same is true today. We can't. Jesus would even say, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you shall in no wise enter the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of God. You have to be strong. You have to be dedicated. The introduction here goes back to the book of Joshua and the encouragement that God gave to Joshua, because Joshua was taking on a new task when he took over from Moses, didn't he? Moses was a good leader, a faithful leader, made a mistake, but strong and dedicated. And so you look in Joshua chapter 1 and verse 6, "Be strong and of good courage, for to this people you shall divide as an inheritance the land which I swore to their fathers to give them." And then you look at the next reading here. "So the Lord," this is the bottom of page 8, "gave to Israel all the land to which he had sworn to give to their fathers. And they took possession of it and dwelt in it." Notice very carefully this statement here. Very carefully. Not a what? Not a word failed of any good thing which the Lord had spoken to the house of Israel. All, top of the next page, all what? All right, it came to pass. Again, you heard me say this just a moment ago. When God says something, you can what? You can count on it. It's going to happen. Don't doubt. Don't question. It's going to happen. It's just a matter of obeying God, remaining faithful, being strong. All right. Now, for the most part, the middle of page 9 here in your books, and I really hope that you read these lessons, and I know you do, but here's what this study's going to show us and remind us about. They entered into the promised land just like God had said. They took control of the promised land just like God had promised. But they didn't do everything that God said for them to do. You know, sometimes we really believe that if I do most of what God says, I mean, we're surrounded here, we're surrounded in our neighborhoods, we're surrounded everywhere with the majority of people that aren't living godly lives. Now, they may not be murderers and robbers and thieves, but they're just not living godly lives. And here we are. I mean, trying our best to live like God says. Not perfect. We fail, we fall short, but let's just compare us to some other people. And here we are, we're good. I think that gives me reason to every now and then just slip, just sort of, come short. Just choose not to do what God has said to do. It doesn't. But that's kind of what the mindset of Israel was in taking the promised land. We're doing most of what God has said for us to do. Every now and then we're going to change some of what God has said. We're not going to fully do everything God has said. We're doing most. And it cost them. And it cost them greatly. When God says, this you are to do, you don't change it, you don't add to it, you don't leave anything out, you do it. And so the middle of the page here talks about another generation of people that were raised up. And that's where the problem arises. So many times we've made the statement we're one generation away from apostasy, from falling away, that it is imperative that we diligently teach those that are younger that this is what you must do because God has said it. And if you don't do it, you're going to suffer. And sometimes that seed just doesn't take root and grow, does it? That's what was happening here for disobedience. One of the things I read too said that, and again, take what I say certainly with a grain of salt if it's not absolutely in the scripture, but the approximate time for the book of Joshua, going back to that study again, was about maybe 7 years for taking the land. In other words, it took time. It took a great deal of time. And the period of Judges, which we're going to talk about in this study, is going to last from 340 years to 400 years or so. A good period of time. All right, so with that in mind, in your books, turn over if you would. And I hope you understand. Let me go back on page 9, the very bottom. The theme, last beginning of the sentence there on page 9, the theme of the book is the Canaanization of Israelite society during the period of settlement. Canaanization, in other words, they're taking this land, they're moving in, but instead of them influencing this land of Canaan, the opposite is happening. Very important lesson. We have to be so mindful of our friends, our neighbors, our co-workers, who we're spending time with, what we do during our free time, the television. You talk about the Canaanization, how they were influenced by the inhabitants of Canaan that were not destroyed, were influenced by everything that happens about us, what we listen to, what we watch, who we are around. Can't emphasize that enough, to be very careful. Top of page 10, Israel's problems began, first full paragraph here, when they did not completely remove the pagan nations of their idolatrous practices from the land. This passage is mentioned a little later in our study here. A little leaven. What does a little leaven do? Leaven's what? It does. Every bit of it. The whole lump, doesn't it? All right, now drop down to Canaan. The book of Judges picks up where Joshua leaves off. Israel has entered the promised land, conquered many of the major tribal strongholds. Nevertheless, and this is another reminder, a lot of work remains. And that's very key, the idea of work. Middle of page 11, the instructions given to Judah. The men of Judah did not shrink from this assignment. They did, however, encourage the men of Simeon to join them in their efforts. You know, that reminds us that this is going to take a lot of effort, isn't it? It's going to be a battle. I mean, think about it. These people, it's their land. They're pretty happy and comfortable there. Their families are there. Their livelihood is there. And we've got someone coming in wanting to take our land. They weren't happy, were they? And they fought. And they fought greatly. God had promised the land to Israel, but they were going to have to fight to take it and fight to keep it. And they were going to have to do everything that God commanded in order for that to be accomplished. And they failed. Time and time again, they failed, didn't they? Top of page 12. Acting as one, the two tribes, Judah and Simeon, went up against their enemies and prevailed. Even so, and this is key as well, the victory belonged to whom? The Lord. And that's who the victory belongs to in our life, isn't it? Never forget that. With God, all things are possible. Greater is He that is in you than he that is in the world. It is God that we have on our side. He's the one that delivered the Canaanites and the Perizzites into their hand. Judges 1 and verse 4. And you begin to see as well here why God wanted exactly what He commanded to be fulfilled. These people were very, very wicked. Very wicked. The Canaanites were extremely wicked and deserving of punishment. This is right above the next section, Jerusalem. Adonai-Bezek received the same punishment that he had inflicted on so many. How many kings was it that he had done what was eventually done to him? 70. It's quite a conquest, wasn't it, that he had been responsible for. Jerusalem. After defeating the Canaanites and the Perizzites at Bezek, the men of Judah turned their attention to Jerusalem, which was situated between the inheritances of Judah and Benjamin. Reporting their successes, Judges 1 verse 8 states, "Now the children of Israel fought against Jerusalem and took it, and they struck it with the edge of the sword and set the city on fire." You know, it seems like complete victory, but we're reminded here what seemed to be a total victory did not last. And that's the key. It's the key in our life as Christians, you know, to overcome a struggle, a battle, and to be victorious. Whether it's taking control of our thoughts, of our actions, of whatever, it's not a one-time battle, is it? It's a constant struggle, if you would. And that's what they faced, and they weren't, the Israelites. That's what they faced, and they weren't ready for it. That they would let their guard down. That they would become sort of content, satisfied, happy. And before you would know it, you begin to see the influence that would take control. And here they are down there in that valley again, suffering because of their own choices and decisions. Let's see if we move on to the next page over here. Deborah, page 14. The text follows the efforts of Judah to Deborah. Rather than focusing on the location, the text focuses on the circumstances behind Deborah's capture. Caleb promised to give the hand of his daughter Achsah in marriage to the brave Israelite who took the city. Othniel, a relative of Caleb, responded to the challenge and was given Achsah as wife. Although this practice of betrothal seems foreign to our culture, Achsah did not protest the arrangement. Instead, she complained about the dowry. And that's where we emphasize the fact of her strength and her courage, her mindset of that which was promised, land, but land's not really too beneficial unless it has some water to provide for, whether it be livestock or whether it be, farming culture. Needed some water. So that's what she asked for, wasn't it? Because, dropping down just a little bit toward the bottom of page 14, because of Achsah's initiative, something more suitable and productive was secured. And then the writer toward the bottom of the page reminds us of the contrast between Achsah and Delilah, who we're going to read about as well. I'm going to mention her in our lesson this morning at 10 o'clock from Judges chapter 16. Top of page 15. Delilah, dropping down just a little bit here, was the consort of Samson, the worst of the judges. She used her initiative to bring down her man and for filthy gained money. All right, look at the application here. The events recorded in Judges chapter 1, these 15 verses, are primarily positive in nature. And this does begin positive. It's going to change, though, isn't it? Israel was victorious because they consulted God and followed what? Followed His plan. You know, I think if we're struggling, I think if someone is having difficulty, I think first we need to really look and see, am I following God? Am I fully following God? I think that's a good place to begin. Now, you may look and you may find out, yes, I'm completely following God. And, that very well may be the case. I think about Job. Here, in chapter 1 of that book, he's referred to as the greatest of the men of the East. He was a good, seems like godly man, but he suffered, didn't he? But I think sometimes we need to look and see, am I facing what I'm facing because I've sort of drifted away from God? And if you understand and realize, no, I haven't, then move on. Sometimes we live in a world that, Satan is constantly at work, isn't he? Nevertheless, the positive beginning of Judges is short-lived because the nation did not drive the Canaanites from the land completely. It was always tempted by the religious practices of the remaining pagans. In other words, why are we suffering? Did we do what God said to do? Yeah. I mean, for the most part. But not completely. You know, it's all or nothing, isn't it? Gets back to what we have already mentioned before. God isn't happy, God isn't content, satisfied with us trying to live a better life than the person outside this building. It's not a comparison issue, is it? It's a, you do what I command you to do, or you suffer. You pay the price. And so, we need to make sure they should have known better, but they didn't. Yes,
and his ordination, you know, they wasn't carrying out his orders. He got to give them just like military orders.
That's right.
People like them all that, and they just done what they wanted to do.
Anyone in the military, I'd say you're not going to be well accepted if you give the excuse, well, we did most of what you told us to do. I mean, that's not an excuse, is it?
No, sir.
You do everything that is commanded.
Out of the book.
Yeah, and that's what God expects of us. Nothing less. Nothing less. And we just can't emphasize that enough, can we? Continuing on with that application here. Although we would like to think we could easily avoid such temptation, experience teaches us that this is not the case. All too often, those we attempt to reform, what happens? They taint us. They influence us. This is why Paul asked the Corinthians, do you not know that a little leaven leavens the whole lump? Christians should learn from Israel's mistake. Don't try to hold on to God with this hand and hold on to the world with the other. You can't, as Jesus made very clear, serve two masters. It's not possible. As Joshua so beautifully would say in chapter 24, choose you this day whom you will serve. Make the choice. You can't hold on to both. All right, look at the first questions. Whose death is mentioned in Judges 1:1? All right. Number 2, what tribe was led? What tribe was to lead Israel to battle?
Judah.
All right, Judah. And the next question, along with Judah, who was it that Judah wanted to be right there with them?
His brother.
All right. And how many kings did Adonai-Bezek reportedly maim? 70. I mean, that really is that's a conquest. What is significant about Shishai, Ammon, and Talmai? What did a writer say they were probably related to?
Giants.
All right, to the giants. Son of Anak, the father of the giants. Who promised? Number 6. Who promised to give his daughter to one who took Debir? Caleb. And what did Aksa ask her father for?
Give her blessings.
All right, we'd like to have, a little better, a lot of courage there, land. Look at the discussion questions. Why were the Israelites justified in attacking the Canaanites? What kind of people were they? They were very what?
Very evil.
Very evil, very wicked, very cruel. They were deserving of the punishment that God wanted to be inflicted upon them. What steps can Christians take to avoid being tainted by the worldly culture surrounding them? What can we do?
I put down stay faithful to the Lord.
All right, stay faithful to the Lord. Live close to Him. Surround yourself with good things. Whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are of good report, all of those things Paul mentions that we should, dwell in us. Out of the heart, Jesus would say, proceeds those things that are evil and wicked. We need to have those good things. And last one, number 3, what lessons can we learn from Caleb? He was always faithful, wasn't he? Of the 12 spies that were sent into the promised land before it was ever taken, Joshua and Caleb, they're faithful and strong. And what lesson can we learn from Asa? She was strong, wasn't she? And had a head to think with and wanted to, that which was good. All right, I hope you read ahead, study. If you have any questions, any comments, lesson number 2, time. Absolutely, Faye, good statement. Asa helped her husband be what God wanted him to be. And that's what a helpmeet is. It is a tremendous blessing. All right, thank you.